In August of 1856, in the small limestone valley called the Neanderthal near Düsseldorf in the Rhineland region of Germany, two men working in an industrial quarry discovered a pile of peculiar bones they assumed came from a prehistoric cave bear. They were prepared to discard them entirely, to throw them back into the rubble pile where no one would ever think to look for them again. Those bones were heavy and discoloured with age. They had a strangeness to them that suggested nothing worth keeping. What they had actually discovered, without knowing it, was the skeletal remains of a human being who had died 40,000 years before Christ was born, 40,000 years before civilization itself would emerge from the river valleys of the ancient world. What they held in their hands was evidence of an entirely unknown species of human being, evidence of people whose existence no one had ever suspected, evidence that would eventually rewrite human history, ignite one of the most passionate scientific controversies of the 19th century, a 40-year battle of ideas that would pit the greatest minds of the age against each other, and ultimately lead to the birth of an entirely new scientific field of paleogenomics that would eventually earn a Nobel Prize more than a century and a half later. The valley was called the Neanderthal, a small limestone gorge in western Germany near Düsseldorf, a valley named centuries earlier after a reformed hymn writer named Joachim Neander who had walked those rocky paths in the 1650s and 1660s. A man of faith and contemplation who composed hymns including the famous Praise to the Lord, the Almighty, the King of Creation in those very hills. No one alive in 1856 imagined that within those limestone cliffs lay the bones of a human being who had lived 40,000 years before written history, before writing itself, before language had fully crystallized into the complex forms we use today. The workers digging in what was called the Kleine Feldhofer Grotte, the small cave at Feldhofer, had no way of knowing they were about to become unwitting witnesses to one of science's most crucial moments of discovery, a moment that would reshape our understanding of human nature and human origins forever. The Düssel River, which had carved this very valley over millions of years, flowed cool and clear through the gorge as it did on every August day, indifferent to the historical threshold the industrial world was about to cross. The valley itself bore the marks of Prussia's industrial transformation. The Rhineland region was booming with activity. New mines, new quarries, new factories were being established constantly. The demand for limestone, for iron, for coal, for the raw materials of the industrial age was insatiable. Everywhere in western Germany, men with picks and blasting powder were reshaping the landscape, extracting the stone and minerals that would build the new world emerging from the agricultural past. Before we proceed any deeper into this remarkable story, if you enjoy falling asleep to tales of ancient history and profound scientific mysteries, take a moment to subscribe. It helps this channel grow and means more stories like this one, waiting for you whenever you need them. The subscriptions you leave truly do help us continue creating content for those nights when you cannot sleep, those nights when your mind is restless and the darkness feels long. Your support allows us to research and craft stories like this one, stories that weave together history, science, and imagination into a tapestry that soothes the mind and settles the spirit. And now, let us return to that valley and to the men whose careful eyes would change everything. Let me paint for you a detailed picture of 1854, 2 years before the Great Discovery. It is summer. The limestone cliffs of the Neanderthal Valley are pale in the strong sunlight, almost bleached white. The sound of industrial work fills the valley constantly. The ringing of hammers on chisels, the rumble of carts laden with stone, the thunder of blasting powder detonating in the cliff face, the shouts of workers coordinating their efforts. The air is thick with limestone dust, a fine white powder that settles on clothing and skin and in the lungs of those who work there day after day. The smell of blasting powder lingers in the air, acrid and sharp, mixing with the smell of sweat and horse manure from the animal teams that haul the stone away. Horse-drawn carts, heavy with their burden of pale limestone blocks, move slowly along the primitive roads that connect the quarry to the towns and cities of the Rhineland. The Düssel River flows below, cold and clear, used for water in various industrial processes, for transport of materials, for the practical necessities of quarrying. The quarry itself is a violent intrusion into the natural landscape. Where once there had been an unbroken limestone cliff face, now there is a huge scar, an excavation that grows larger week by week as the workers extract block after block. The south wall of the valley is being systematically consumed. Geological layers that had been protected within the stone for millions of years are suddenly exposed to light and air. Those layers tell stories of ancient seas and extinct creatures, but no one taking time to read them carefully. Everyone is focused on the work itself, on extracting the stone, on maintaining schedule and profits. Imagine yourself standing in the Neander Valley, the Neanderthal, in the limestone country east of Düsseldorf. The valley itself is beautiful in its way, a natural gorge cut through pale limestone by the Düssel River, which flows year-round with water cold and clear, water that has been carving through this stone for tens of thousands of years. The cliffs rise on either side, pale and ghostly in certain lights, particularly in the early morning when mist rises from the river below. Dark openings dot the cliff faces where caves and grottos open into the stone, each one a portal into geological time. The landscape is wild in places, cultivated in others. The vegetation clings to the limestone slopes. In autumn, when we imagine this story, the air has that crisp quality that comes when summer's warmth is fading and winter waits beyond the horizon. In this valley in 1854, two industrialists named Wilhelm Beckershoff and Friedrich Wilhelm Pieper have recently founded a company called the Aktiengesellschaft für Marmorindustrie Neanderthal, the joint stock company for marble industry Neanderthal. Their purpose is straightforward and practical. They're going to extract limestone from the south wall of the valley and convert it into building stone and lime for the rapidly growing cities of the Rhineland region. Germany is transforming. The industrial age is arriving with force. Cities are expanding beyond their medieval walls. New buildings are going up everywhere. Factories, townhouses, public buildings, warehouses, churches, government buildings. Stone is needed constantly. Lime is needed for mortar and cement. These entrepreneurs see an opportunity. The limestone in the Neanderthal is of excellent quality, fine-grained and workable. The location is accessible from the roads and the river. The Düssel River itself provides water for various industrial processes. They establish their quarry on the south wall of the valley. They begin blasting and digging and hauling away the stone with systematic intensity. The work is dangerous and dirty. Explosions shake the valley. Dust clouds rise into the air. The limestone cliff faces are gradually eaten away, changed forever by industrial activity. The workers they employ are simple men with strong backs and practical minds. They think little of the geological history they are destroying. They think little of what might be hidden in the stone they blast to rubble. They only think of the day's work ahead of them, of the weight of the stone they must move, of the hazards they must avoid, of the coins that will be in their pockets at week's end. They do not think about mysteries. They do not think about ancient peoples or hidden secrets or the vast span of time compressed into the stone they break. They only think about the labour before them and the survival that labour will bring to their families. They are the working men of the industrial age, caught up in the massive transformation of Germany, participating unknowingly in history while merely trying to earn their living. Many of them have worked in these quarries for years. They have learned to read the stone, to understand how it breaks, how to place explosives for maximum efficiency, how to secure the loosened blocks so they can be safely lowered and transported. They bear the scars of their work, fingers broken and healed crookedly, hearing damaged from the constant noise, lungs filled with limestone dust that makes them cough in the evenings. But the wages are steady, more reliable than farm work, and in the industrial economy of Prussia in the 1850s, that reliability is precious. They are not educated. Most cannot read. They know nothing of science or natural history, but they are intelligent observers of the material world. They notice things. They see patterns. They understand their environment with the practical wisdom that comes from long experience. Now imagine stepping back much further in time, not just 2 years, but 4,000 centuries back through the ages. Imagine stepping backward through time itself, through all of recorded history, through all of civilization that we know and record in books and documents, through the rise and fall of empires, the building of great cities, the invention of writing, the development of languages, and all the complex culture that humans have created. You're moving backward through 40,000 years, and it is a number so vast that the human mind struggles to grasp it. To understand how long 40,000 years really is, imagine this. It is nearly 2,000 times longer than the entire recorded history of human civilization. It is longer than the entire span of Christianity or Islam. It is longer than all of written human history combined, all the books ever written, all the records kept. and you are moving backward into that darkness, that vast and ancient past, that deep time before time was measured or recorded. The world changes the further back you go. The climate is progressively colder, the vegetation becomes progressively sparser, the animals become progressively larger and more fearsome, the human presence becomes progressively less familiar, the languages are lost, the cultures are lost, the written records end, but the bones remain, the caves preserve, the frozen ground keeps secrets, and if you go back far enough, if you go back 4,000 centuries, you reach that moment, that season, that valley where our story truly begins. Imagine yourself standing in that same valley, but transformed beyond any recognition. The climate is harsh and unforgiving in the way that only an ice age can be harsh. This is the last ice age, though you do not know to call it that, because you have no language for geological epochs. You do not think in terms of epochs or geological periods, you only think in terms of seasons and years, and the rhythm of the world as you have always known it. But the glaciers are vast across Europe to the north, covering enormous expanses, mountains of ice that dwarf any mountain made of rock. These glaciers are not retreating. They are advancing slowly but inexorably, pushing southward, grinding away the bedrock beneath them, carving out valleys and basins, fundamentally reshaping the landscape. The sea levels are lower because so much water is locked into ice. The coastlines of Europe are different from what they will be in modern times, and the world is drifting towards cycles of extreme winter cold. This is not constant cold. There are cycles, mild periods and harsh periods, but the overall trend is toward colder conditions. The nights are long, the days are short, the seasons are pronounced. Summer brings a brief thaw and a burst of plant growth, but it is never warm, never reaches the temperatures that the Rhineland Valley will experience in the 20th century. Winter is long and bitter and harsh, lasting many months, with temperatures that drop far below what modern Europeans experience. The spring and fall are brief transitions, days when the temperature hovers near freezing, when the landscape is mud and wet rather than ice or green vegetation. Survival is marginal, every season is a test, every winter is a threat. The plants that survive in this climate are sparse and twisted, adapted by evolution to the harsh conditions. The trees are stunted and bent by the wind that sweeps down from the glaciers to the north, a cold wind that seems to come from the ends of the earth itself. There are no tall forests here. There is no abundance of plant life. Everything is adapted to survive with little, to grow in the difficult conditions, to thrive despite the cold. The grasses are low, close to the ground, maximizing their access to any warmth from the earth below. The shrubs are twisted and gnarled, shaped by centuries of wind pressure. The few trees that grow are willows and birches, hardy species that can withstand the conditions. They are spaced far apart. Life here is tough and sparse. The biodiversity is low compared to temperate climates. Success comes not from abundance but from specialization, from perfecting adaptation to specific harsh conditions. The animals that roam this landscape are enormous and strange to modern eyes. Woolly mammoths wander the tundra-like lands with their distinctive humped backs, their bodies covered in long matted fur, dark and thick, adapted perfectly to the extreme cold. Their tusks curve in great arcs, sometimes reaching 12 feet long or more. Their bodies are massive, sometimes reaching weights of 6 tons or more, with powerful legs that can move through snow and across frozen ground. They are the largest land animals of this age. Woolly rhinoceroses, with their prominent shoulder humps and 2 horns stacked one above the other, browse the low vegetation, stripping bark from the scattered trees. Their bodies are heavily built and compact, covered with thick fur and a layer of protective fat underneath, a physiology perfectly adapted for cold survival. There are reindeer herds, vast herds that migrate across the landscape following the seasons and the forage, sometimes numbering in the thousands or tens of thousands, moving in waves across the landscape with the changing seasons. There are cave lions, larger than African lions today, with teeth like daggers and strength enough to kill a mammoth. There are hyenas of enormous size, larger and more powerful than any hyena species living today. Pack hunters that can bring down large prey. There are wolves, smaller than the cave lions but numerous, forming packs that hunt efficiently. There is a natural world of terrible beauty and brutal efficiency. Predators are always hunting, prey is always fleeing. Death is common and quick. The weak do not survive, but the strong, the clever, the cooperative, the capable, these can flourish in the harsh conditions. The sky is often grey, the winds are strong, the nights are long and dark. The darkness is complete in a way that modern humans with electric lights can scarcely imagine. When darkness falls in the Ice Age, the world becomes utterly black except for the stars. There are only stars above, and the stars are brilliant in the clear, cold air, undimmed by any light pollution, arranged in patterns that are different from the patterns of stars in the 21st century, because the Earth's axis has shifted slightly over 40,000 years due to the slow wobble of the Earth's rotation, but still recognizable to anyone who watches the sky with understanding. The only other lights are those made by humans, the light of the hearth fire, the light of torches made from burning wood and bone, lights that push back the darkness and create a sphere of safety and warmth in the cold night. The wind carries the smell of frozen earth and snow and the distant musk of the great herds. This is the world into which the individual whose bones would be discovered in 1856 was born and lived and died. This is the world they called home. This is the only world they knew. For them, this was normal. This was the natural state of the earth, and the sky, and the animals and the plants. The valley itself, the Neander Valley as it would someday be called, has a history that predates the Neanderthals by millions of years. The limestone that forms the cliffs was laid down in an ancient sea that covered this region during the Cretaceous period, roughly 100 million years ago. The Düsseldorf River, flowing through the valley, began carving the gorge over millions of years, cutting through the soft limestone, creating caves and grottos as the water dissolved the rock. The Kleine Feldhofer Grotte was probably created by water moving through the rock, a natural cave chamber formed by the solvent power of water over millennia. When Neanderthals discovered this cave, it was already ancient by human standards, already tens of thousands of years old, perhaps much older. When they sheltered in it, slept in it, died in it, they were taking refuge in a space that had been carved by geological processes operating over incomprehensible spans of time. And when the quarry workers of the 19th century destroyed the cave with blasting powder, they were, without knowing it, destroying a natural monument that had survived for millions of years. Imagine this individual as a younger person, strong and capable, in their prime hunting years. They are standing outside the cave entrance on a cold day, working on stone. In their hands is a piece of flint, a hard stone that breaks with sharp edges when struck correctly. They hold a stone hammer, a rock with a suitable weight and shape, chosen from several possible rocks because they understand which properties make a good hammerstone. They strike the flint carefully, removing flakes in a specific pattern, shaping the stone toward a specific form they can envision in their mind before they begin working. This is craft. This is skill learned over many years of practice, knowledge passed from parent to child, technique refined and improved over generations. The technique they use is called the Levallois technique, a sophisticated stoneworking method that requires planning and foresight. They must envision the final product. They must remove flakes in a specific sequence to achieve the desired result. They must understand the inherent properties of the stone, where it will break, how it will respond to force, what shapes are possible. The flakes that come off are also useful. Some are kept because their natural edges are sharp as any modern surgical blade, suitable for cutting meat and bone. Some are discarded because they are not the right shape or sharpness. The individual works methodically, understanding the properties of the stone, knowing instinctively how to strike it to achieve the desired result. They know through years of experience which stones work best, which direction the grain runs in the stone, where the weak points are. This is not crude. This is not the work of an intellectually limited being. This is the work of someone who understands stone deeply, who has spent years learning its properties, who can execute complex motor tasks that require fine coordination and precise force control. Modern stone workers, using modern tools and modern understanding of geology, struggle to replicate the quality of Neanderthal stone tools. The tools being made will be hafted onto wooden handles with sinew, creating composite tools, spear points, cutting implements, scrapers, knives, each designed for specific purposes. Some tools will be used for hunting, some for butchering game, some for processing plant materials, some for crafting other tools. This is tool specialization. This is technology. This is intelligence at work in the physical world. Imagine now the cave entrance. The Kleinfeldhofer Grotte, the small Feldhofer cave, is not a grand cavern with soaring ceilings and vast chambers like the great caves of southern France. It is modest in size, modest in dimensions, but it is shelter. It is protection from the wind and the cold. It is home. Inside, smoke from a hearth drifts upward into the stone ceiling, and the air is filled with the smell of smoke, acrid and alive and warm. The cave has the feel of a place that has been lived in for many seasons, many years. The floor is worn smooth in places from the passage of many feet. The walls bear marks of hands, perhaps not artistic in the sense of painting, but marks showing that humans have existed in this space, have touched these stones. The individual we are imagining is now in their declining years, perhaps in their late 30s or early 40s, which in this era would be considered quite advanced for their kind. Neanderthals typically lived shorter lives than modern humans, their skeletons bearing evidence of injury and stress that modern medical care would ameliorate. To reach 40 was to have surpassed the average expectancy for the species. To reach 50 would be to have lived an exceptionally long life, remarkable enough to speak of. To reach 60 would be virtually unknown, essentially unknown to the group, so rare that it would be considered beyond normal possibility. The family structure is simple but effective. An adult male is the primary hunter, the provider, the one who takes greatest risks. A female manages the domestic space, processes the meat that is brought back, makes clothing, tends the fire, teaches the young. Young males are learning to hunt through observation and gradual participation, joining on safer hunts first, gradually advancing to more dangerous game as they prove their capability. Young females are learning the skills they will need to run a household and raise their own young someday. Elderly individuals, those who can no longer actively hunt but are too valued to abandon, remain within the family group, contributing wisdom and knowledge and the maintenance of group identity and memory. This is a social structure. This is not the simple reproductive unit of animals. This is a family with roles and expectations and mutual obligation. Neanderthals do not survive as isolated individuals. They survive as members of family groups, of communities, of peoples with shared language and shared culture, and shared understanding of how the world works. They sit wrapped in animal hides. The wraps are crude by modern standards, but they are effective and well made by the standards of their time. They are fashioned from the hides of animals killed in the hunt, animals like deer and woolly rhinoceros and reindeer and other creatures of the Ice Age. The hides are bound with sinew and fur, creating layers of protection against the biting cold. There are wraps covering the legs, leggings made from hide and bound with sinew, and wraps around the torso and arms, wraps made of fur and hide that keep the body warm. The individual's body is covered entirely in protective clothing made from the natural materials available, no bare skin exposed to the elements. This individual has lived longer than most of their kind make it to see, and they carry the marks of a long and difficult life. There are old breaks in the bones that have healed imperfectly over the years. The bones show evidence of serious injury and remarkable recovery. A healed collarbone, a damaged shoulder that shows signs of trauma and healing, ribs that had been fractured and mended by their own body's remarkable capacity for recovery. There are marks of stress and strain from a life lived at the edge of survival, a life that would have defeated anyone less strong, less resilient, less determined to endure. The Feldhofer individual's skeleton shows signs of osteoarthritis, suggesting they lived long with pain and restricted mobility, yet they were still cared for and kept alive. They did not simply die when they became unable to hunt. They were fed, they were protected, they were maintained by their family. This requires compassion. This requires a sense that the elderly person has value beyond their immediate economic contribution. This requires something beyond simple animal instinct. But this individual has endured. This individual has survived. They have outlived many of their contemporaries. They have persisted through winters that would have killed the weak, through injuries that would have been fatal in the modern world before medical care. They have survived injuries that would have been fatal to anyone without extraordinary will to live and family support. And they carry something else. Intelligence in their eyes, perhaps. Sadness, certainly. The weight of years lived. They understand at some level that their time is ending. They have watched other members of their family age and die. They understand the cycle of life and death. They understand seasons and the migration patterns of game animals. They understand which plants are safe to eat and which are poisonous. They have accumulated knowledge through a lifetime of observation and experience. They understand mortality in a way that an animal simply living by instinct could not understand. This is consciousness. This is the awareness of one's own existence and one's own eventual death. They sit at the hearth with their family gathered around them in the evening. They are not alone. A female, perhaps a mate or partner, works at the fire preparing a meal of meat from a successful hunt several days before. The meat has been stored carefully in the cool cave, and it is being warmed and prepared for consumption. Their young are close by, protected within the cave, watching and learning the ways of their kind through observation and imitation, and guided practice. There is no writing here. There are no books. There is no art as we think of art, though there is evidence that their kind may have engaged in ritual and possibly spiritual practices, marks and engravings on stone, objects deliberately placed suggesting intentional design. There is only the transmitted knowledge passed mouth to ear, from mind to mind, generation to generation, of where the herds move with the seasons, of which plants nourish the body and which poison it, of how to craft stone into tools sharp enough to cut meat and bone, strong enough to kill the massive beast that sustained the family. This is culture. This is knowledge. This is the accumulation of understanding developed over countless generations, passed forward through time, always changing slightly, always improving, always adapting to new circumstances and new challenges. The individual sitting at the hearth is a keeper of this knowledge, a transmitter of culture, a living link in an unbroken chain reaching backward to the origins of their kind, and forward to the future they will not see. The cave itself, the Kleine Feldhofer Grotte, is no accident. Neanderthals understand shelter. They understand the value of caves for protection from predators and from weather. The limestone cliffs of the Neanderthal Valley contain numerous caves and grottos. Some are larger, some are smaller. Some are close to good hunting grounds. Some are close to water. The Feldhofer cave is well situated for a family group. It has protection. It has access to the Düssel River below, providing water and access to game that comes to drink. The cave floor is good, suitable for establishing a hearth, suitable for sleeping. Over many generations, this cave has been occupied and reoccupied. The floor contains many layers of sediment, each representing a different occupation. The current inhabitants are not the first. The cave has a history, a depth of human presence reaching back many generations, perhaps centuries. When this individual eventually dies and is buried, their bones will be covered by sediment. Rain will wash clay and silt into the cave. Wind will carry dust. Animals will die in the cave and their bones will add to the accumulation. Summer floods will bring material. Year after year, century after century, the sediment accumulates. The bones are buried deeper. They are protected from the elements. They are preserved. The sediment around them mineralize them, turn them from bone into something harder, more durable, more capable of surviving geological time. And in this protected state, sealed within the cave, the bones wait. They wait for 40,000 years. They wait through ice ages and warm periods. They wait through the entire history of civilization. They wait for a moment when a German schoolteacher will recognize them as something extraordinary. They wait for the moment when science will advance enough to read their genetic code and learn the secrets of their species. This individual does not know they will be remembered forever in human history. They cannot imagine being remembered across 40,000 years. They cannot conceive of a future so distant that it is beyond their understanding. They do not know that they will be excavated 40,000 years in their future. They do not know that men and women in strange clothes will dig their bones from the same valley and argue about them with such fierce passion that wars of words will rage for decades through the salons and universities and lecture halls of the European scientific world. They do not know that their species will disappear entirely from the earth, that a different kind of human being will inherit this planet, that technology and cities and writing and art and music and literature will transform the world beyond any possibility they could imagine. They do not know that their genes will persist, woven into the future humanity that replaces them. They know only this moment. They know only the cold. They know only the hunt. They know only the family huddled close for warmth in the darkness of the cave. They know the comfort of the hearth when evening falls and darkness covers the valley entirely, when the stars appear in the sky, different constellations from what we see today, moving in patterns that their ancestors have watched and learned for countless generations. They know the seasons and how they cycle. They know the movement of the animals and their migrations. They know the rhythm of survival in the Ice Age. They know what it takes to endure through winter. They know the taste of meat and the feeling of warmth from the fire. They know fear and love and the bonds of family. This is their world. This is their home. This is all the world they will ever know. Return now with me to August 1856. The quarry work is proceeding as it has been for 2 years, methodically and profitably. The workers have blasted through into a small cave chamber, and they find themselves amid layers of clay and sediment and the scattered bones of animals accumulated over countless centuries of geological time. The cave itself is being destroyed by the quarrying operation. The limestone blocks containing the cave deposits are being removed and hauled away. Among it all, the workers find what appears to be human skeletal remains. The skull is heavy, with prominent brow ridges, oddly shaped in ways that seem strange to anyone who has looked at modern human skulls. The bones of the arms and legs are different from any modern human bones they have ever seen. The ribs are curved in an unusual way. The robustness of the bone, the thickness, speaks to a strength far greater than modern humans typically possess. This is no ordinary skeleton. The workers, practical men with little formal education in anatomy or science, assume these must be the remains of some ancient creature, or possibly a deformed human from some past century, perhaps even a victim of some plague or disease or accident. They think to discard them entirely. After all, who cares about old bones? The quarry's purpose is stone, not history. The quarry's purpose is profit, not the past. The bones are of no value to them. They have no economic value. They serve no industrial purpose. They are just old bones in the way of the mining operation. They are obstacles. The workers barely give them a second thought. But among or connected to these workers is a man whose careful attention and genuine curiosity will change the course of science. Johann Carl Fuhlroth is a schoolteacher in the nearby town of Elberfeld, located not far from Düsseldorf, in the rapidly industrializing Rhineland region of Western Germany. He was born on December 31st, 1803, and in 1856 he's approaching 50 years of age. He's a man of modest means and modest position in society, but he's a man of keen observational skill and genuine intellectual curiosity about the natural world around him. Elberfeld itself is a town in profound transformation during this period. The textile industry is booming like nowhere else in Germany. New factories are opening, powered by steam and machinery, new technology that represents the cutting edge of 19th century industrial innovation. The town is growing explosively, from a small medieval settlement of perhaps 10,000 people into an industrial centre that will eventually house hundreds of thousands. Whole neighbourhoods are expanding seemingly overnight with workers' housing, rows of modest buildings constructed to house the armies of workers pouring into the town seeking employment and economic opportunity. The air fills with smoke from factory chimneys and steam from the new machinery. The smell of dyes and industrial processes permeates the streets. The sound of machinery echoes through streets that had been quiet just decades before. The river, which once was used only for mill power, is now polluted with industrial waste. The landscape is transformed. The pastoral Rhineland of earlier centuries is disappearing, replaced by industrial development. Fuhlrott walks through this changing landscape daily, navigating between the old medieval town and the new industrial developments, perhaps feeling some melancholy at the transformation of the natural world around him, observing the geological context of his home carefully, understanding how the Düssel River shapes the land, how the limestone underlying the region tells the story of an ancient sea that once covered this part of Europe millions of years ago. He teaches school, training the next generation of young citizens in an era when formal education is becoming more common and more valued, no longer the privilege of the wealthy alone, but increasingly available to the children of workers and the middle classes. But his real passion is for natural history, for the study of the earth and its deep past, for understanding the geological history preserved in the rocks around him. He has been collecting fossils and geological specimens in the region for years, building a personal collection housed in his study at home, studying the rocks and the earth and the history they reveal in careful detail. His collection grows, his knowledge deepens. He understands that stones tell stories if you know how to read them, that every fossil is a message from deep time, that the earth preserves the record of its own history in the rocks and minerals and the remains of ancient creatures. Time is preserved in stone. The deep past is accessible to those who know how to look. He is a member of the Naturhistorischer Verein, the Natural History Society in the region, a gathering of educated amateurs and professionals who share a passion for understanding the natural world. These societies were vital in 19th century Germany, places where gentlemen of education and means could pursue their intellectual interests outside the constraints of formal university positions, where discoveries could be discussed and debated in an atmosphere of intellectual freedom, where ideas could be shared and refined through discussion with peers. The society provides legitimacy to Fuhlrott's work. It gives him a framework for his research. It connects him to other naturalists. It validates his interest in natural history as a serious intellectual pursuit worthy of time and energy. He has maintained relationships with the workers and operators of the quarry, and he has expressed interest in any interesting discoveries they might make. He has made it known that he would value the chance to examine any unusual specimens, any bones or fossils found in the course of their work. When word reaches him in August of 1856 of the discovery of these unusual bones in the Kleine Feldhofer Grotte, the small Feldhofer cave being destroyed by the quarrying operation, he moves quickly to secure them before they are lost or discarded or destroyed. The workers are indifferent. The bones mean nothing to them. They are obstacles to the work, curiosities at best. Fuhlrott's interest, his insistence that they be preserved, seems peculiar to men focused on stone and profit. But Fuhlrott is persistent. He obtains the bones. He brings them back to his study in Elberfeld. There, in the lamplight of evening, he examines them himself, turning them over in his hands carefully, studying their contours and proportions, holding them up to the light to understand their structure, using his magnifying glass to peer closely at the fine details of the bone itself. Some of the bones bear the marks of intentional burial or careful placement. This is not a skeleton scattered by the accident of geological burial. This appears to be a deliberate human interment. In that moment of private examination, Fuhlrott experiences a sudden flash of realization that comes rarely in a lifetime, a moment of pure scientific insight. These are not the bones of a modern human being. These are not the bones of a diseased individual or a deformity, despite what future skeptics would claim. These are not the bones of a recent burial or a historical victim whose family history might be traced. These are the bones of something fundamentally different, something other, something ancient beyond the calculations of anyone who had seriously considered human history, something whose very existence had never been suspected by the scientific world. Fuhlrott understands that he has encountered evidence of a human being from an incredibly remote antiquity, an age so distant that it challenges everything that was known about human history and human origins. But he also understands that no one will believe him without expert validation. He understands that he is a provincial schoolteacher, that his observations, however careful and systematic, will not carry sufficient weight in the scientific world of his time. A man of his station, without the credentials of a major university, without the prestige of a famous institution, cannot expect to overturn established doctrine. And so he does what any thoughtful scientist would do. He approaches Hermann Schaaffhausen, the professor of anatomy at the University of Bonn, a man of genuine standing in the German scientific establishment. Schaaffhausen is a serious man, trained and experienced in anatomical research, a specialist in human skeletal morphology, who has spent decades examining human remains in all their variation and understanding the structure of the human skeleton in detailed scientific context. He is exactly the kind of expert whose endorsement would carry weight. When Fuhlrott shows him the Feldhofer bones and shares his careful observations, Schaaffhausen becomes immediately engaged with the material. He examines each bone individually. He measures them. He compares them to his extensive knowledge of modern human anatomy. He sees precisely what Fuhlrott has seen. The morphology is distinctly different from any modern human skeleton in his collection. The proportions are wrong for modern humans. The thickness of the bone, the cortical bone, is substantially thicker, indicating muscles of exceptional strength. The musculature attachments show marks of powerful musculature vastly exceeding modern human norms. The shape of the skull is profoundly different. The cranium is different in proportion. The brow ridges are prominent in ways modern humans do not display. The rear of the skull is shaped differently. The curve of the ribs is unusual, more rounded, suggesting a different chest shape and breathing capacity. The length and shape of the long bones, the femur, the tibia, all of it speaks to a human being of a fundamentally different kind. Schaaffhausen is convinced by the evidence. This is not speculation. This is careful anatomical analysis. The evidence is overwhelming. Together, in 1857, Fuhlrott and Schaaffhausen prepare a detailed scientific presentation of their findings. They compose a careful paper describing the Feldhofer skeleton. They gather every piece of evidence they can. They have the bones themselves as specimens. They have detailed measurements and anatomical drawings. They have geological context information about where the bones were found and in what layer of sediment. They have comparative anatomy, drawings and measurements comparing the Feldhofer bones to modern human skeletons to other mammalian bones, showing the distinctive characteristics. In June of 1857, they present their findings formally to the Niederrheinische Gesellschaft für Natur- und Heilkunde in Bonn, the Lower Rhine Society for Natural History and Medicine, a respected scientific society in Germany. They present their evidence carefully and methodically, building their case slowly, allowing the anatomical facts to speak for themselves. They argue that these bones represent a human being from the glacial period, from an era when extinct animals like mammoths and woolly rhinoceroses still roamed the earth in abundance, when the climate of Europe was vastly different, when humans shared the landscape with Ice Age megafauna. They argue that the Feldhofer individual lived at a time of extreme environmental challenge, when survival required extraordinary strength and adaptation. They believe these bones are ancient beyond the ability of current science to measure with precision, but that the geological context, the sediment layers, the extinct animal bones found in association, strongly suggests they come from an age of unimaginable antiquity. The implications are staggering. If this is true, if these bones are truly from the Ice Age, then humans have existed on Earth far longer than anyone had previously supposed. The human chronology that had been accepted for centuries, based on biblical genealogies and classical historical records, would need to be rewritten entirely. And perhaps, terrifyingly to many who hold traditional Christian beliefs, perhaps this ancient human is ancestral to modern peoples. Perhaps we ourselves are descended from such creatures. Perhaps the elegant theological framework that placed humans at the pinnacle of creation, separate and distinct and created in God's image, would need to be fundamentally reconsidered. The reaction from the scientific community to the Fuhlrott-Schaaffhausen announcement was mixed, to say the least. Some naturalists were intrigued by the evidence and the careful presentation. Some recognized the possible significance of the discovery. The geological evidence seemed sound. The anatomical analysis was detailed and systematic. Some younger scientists, those more open to the revolutionary ideas beginning to circulate about evolution and species change, found the Feldhofer evidence compelling. But others, particularly those bound by religious conviction or conservative scientific thinking, were deeply resistant to the idea. How could one overturn thousands of years of Christian teaching and biblical authority based on a pile of old bones found in a German quarry? And among the most powerful skeptics was Rudolf Virchow, one of the most important figures in 19th century science, a giant of German medicine and pathology, a man whose opinions carried enormous weight in the scientific world of his time. Virchow had made his reputation through rigorous anatomical and pathological research. He had studied disease processes in meticulous detail. He understood illness and deformity and how they could alter the human skeleton. His prestige was vast. When Virchow pronounced judgment on a scientific matter, the scientific community listened. Virchow examined the bones, either in person or through careful study of plaster casts and anatomical drawings. He pronounced his judgment with the confidence of authority that came from decades of successful research and institutional power. These bones, he declared, were not those of a distinct human species. They were not evidence of remote antiquity. They were not evidence of an ancient and different kind of human being. They were simply the remains of a modern human being who had suffered from disease, specifically a pathological condition that had caused deformities affecting many parts of the skeleton. Virchow proposed an explanation so peculiar, so wildly imaginative in its specifics, that it has echoed through history ever since and become almost legendary in its strangeness. He proposed that the Feldhofer skeleton was the remains of a Cossack, a Russian horseman who had somehow wandered into the Neander Valley during some military campaign or period of unrest, and secreted himself in a cave where he eventually died and was buried by circumstance. The bowed legs that Fuhlrott had noted and described carefully, Virchow explained, were not ancient human anatomy, but the result of decades spent riding horses, a condition known as genu varum, that any Cossack would develop over a lifetime of horsemanship. The prominent brow ridges were not a sign of a primitive species, but the result of excessive frowning brought on by chronic pain from arthritis and rickets, conditions the supposed Cossack suffered from, causing him to grimace in pain throughout his life in ways that would lead to abnormal development of the frontal bones. Even the unusual shape of the skull could be explained by these diseases and deformities, by the pathological processes affecting bone development and remodeling. It was, Virchow argued, a coherent explanation that accounted for every anomalous feature of the skeleton by reference to known medical and pathological conditions. It was, from a certain perspective, a brilliant explanation that accounted for every anomalous feature by attributing them all to pathology rather than primitivism or species difference. The elegance of Virchow's theory was precisely what made it so dangerous to the advancement of paleoanthropology. Because Virchow's explanation could not be easily disproven with the data available at the time, it was unfalsifiable in the way that many clinical diagnoses are. The disease could explain anything, because diseases affect the skeleton in countless ways, because bone responds to pathological processes in complex and varied ways that are difficult to predict, because a sufficiently creative clinician can construct a disease narrative that fits any set of symptoms by invoking enough different pathological processes. The scientific community, confronted with the choice between accepting the revolutionary implications of the Feldhofer discovery and accepting Virchow's more conservative pathological explanation, largely sided with Virchow's authority. Scientists are human. Authority matters. Prestige matters. Established reputation carries weight. Virchow had been right about so many things throughout his career. Virchow had made fundamental discoveries in cellular pathology, discoveries that had advanced medical science significantly. Virchow had trained generations of scientists, had mentored the next generation of leaders in medical research and practice. Virchow had institutional power, positions at prestigious universities, influence in scientific societies, respect from peers across Europe. When Virchow spoke, scientists listened. It was easier to accept Virchow's diagnosis than to challenge the authority of the greatest medical scientist of the era. Challenging Virchow would require extraordinary courage and extraordinary evidence. The evidence for Neanderthals was not yet overwhelming. New discoveries would be needed. Time would be needed. Yet the bones could not be so easily dismissed, and word spread through the scientific community, from naturalists to geologists to anatomists, that something significant had been found in a German quarry in 1856. Fuhlrott became known for his discovery, though he never received the highest honours. Schaaffhausen's reputation was enhanced by his careful analysis, but both men had to endure years of scepticism and debate. Both had to defend their positions against the weight of Virchow's authority, and both ultimately received vindication, though only through the testimony of evidence that accumulated over decades. New specimens, new discoveries, new analyses that made the existence of Neanderthals undeniable. But not all voices in the scientific world sided with Virchow's skepticism. Among those who examined the evidence carefully was Charles Lyell, the greatest geologist of the age, the founder of modern uniformitarian geology, the man who had spent his life studying the deep history written in the rocks of the earth. Lyell was already elderly by 1863, already retired from many of his positions, but he was still regarded as a supreme authority on geological matters. In 1863, Lyell travelled to Germany to visit the Feldhofer quarry himself and to examine the bones in person. He understood geological context. He understood how sediment accumulated. He understood how long bones had to be buried to become the fossils observed. His visit was significant. Lyell's examination supported the Fuhlrott-Schaaffhausen interpretation. These bones were ancient. They came from the glacial period. They were evidence of humans contemporaneous with extinct megafauna. Lyell's authority lent weight to the Feldhofer evidence. Similarly, Thomas Huxley, Darwin's great defender and one of the most prominent naturalists in Britain, examined the evidence carefully. Huxley was a skillful comparative anatomist who had studied primates extensively. In 1863, he published Evidence as to Man's Place in Nature, a book arguing that humans were descended from ape-like ancestors and that evidence from embryology, anatomy and paleontology all supported this view. The Feldhofer skeleton fit into Huxley's framework. It was evidence of a more primitive form of humanity, a possible ancestor or relative, evidence of the gradation between apes and modern humans that evolutionary theory predicted. Huxley's detailed anatomical analysis supported the genuine antiquity and distinctiveness of the Feldhofer bones. A naturalist named William King, an Anglo-Irish geologist from Queen's College in Galway in Ireland, read about the Feldhofer discoveries through the scientific literature and correspondence circulating through the European academic community. King was fascinated by the question of human origins and evolution, a question that was becoming increasingly central to natural history following the publication of Charles Darwin's Origin of Species in 1859. King believed that Darwin's framework, the idea that species changed over time, that life was interconnected through descent from common ancestors, provided the key to understanding the Feldhofer skeleton. King was willing to embrace controversial ideas if the evidence supported them. He was not bound by the institutional caution that sometimes characterized established German science. In 1863, he gave a lecture to the British Association for the Advancement of Science, a prestigious scientific organization, proposing that the Feldhofer bones represented not a deformed modern human, but an entirely separate species of human being, a distinct human species that had existed in ancient times and then gone extinct. He published his detailed views in 1864 in the Quarterly Journal of Science, proposing a formal scientific name for these ancient remains, Homo neanderthalensis, taking the generic name Homo, indicating a human being, and the specific name Neanderthalensis, taken from the Neander Valley where the bones had been found, where the small cave called the Kleine Feldhofer Grotte had yielded the remarkable skeleton. King's proposal was revolutionary in its implications. By naming these bones Homo neanderthalensis, King was declaring to the scientific world that an extinct species of human had once walked the earth. He was asserting that the Feldhofer individual was not simply a diseased modern human, not a pathological deformity, not a Cossack horseman with rickets. He was arguing that Neanderthals were human. They belonged to our genus, Homo, but they were a separate species from modern humans, a species that had lived and flourished and eventually disappeared. The very act of naming the species gave it legitimacy. It was no longer merely a curiosity. It was a recognized species in the Linnaean taxonomic system. It had a place in the natural world. It was real. By the 1870s, as more similar bones were discovered in other locations across Europe, it became harder to maintain that Neanderthals were simply deformed moderns. In 1829, decades before the Feldhofer discovery, Engis II had been discovered in Belgium in caves near the town of Engis, a child's skeleton with characteristic Neanderthal features, but at the time it had been misidentified or overlooked as significant. In 1848, even earlier in the timeline, Gibraltar I had been discovered in Forbes's quarry in Gibraltar, an adult female Neanderthal skull found and sent to London, where it sat in museum storage for years without being recognised as what it was, evidence of an ancient human species. Remarkably, both of these discoveries had preceded Feldhofer by decades, but neither had been recognised for what it was. Scientific opportunity had passed by. The world was not ready to understand these discoveries. But after Feldhofer, after Fuhlrott and Schaaffhausen had forced attention to the issue, these earlier discoveries suddenly made sense. They were re-examined. They were recognised as Neanderthal. They provided corroboration. The discovery in 1886 of 2 more Neanderthal skulls in the Spy Cave in Belgium, discovered by the caves in clear archaeological context, sealed the argument definitively. The Spy Cave skeletons were so clearly Neanderthal, so undeniably part of the same population as the Feldhofer individual, that Virchow's disease theory completely collapsed. You could claim one skeleton was pathological, but you could not claim that multiple skeletons from different sites, from different time periods, all showing the same distinctive characteristics, were all diseased individuals. The pattern was becoming undeniable. These were not isolated deformities or pathological cases. These were members of a population, a people, a species. They had spread across Europe from Spain to Russia. They had lived in caves and open sites. They had survived the Ice Age for tens of thousands of years, and then they had disappeared from the fossil record entirely, replaced eventually by the ancestors of modern humans, by our direct ancestors, the people from whom we are descended. Now imagine yourself once more at the Feldhofer cave, 40,000 years before 1856, in the same valley that would someday echo with the sound of industrial quarrying. The season is changing. Autumn is advancing toward the harshness of winter. The days are becoming noticeably shorter. The nights are growing longer and colder. The individual we're imagining is sitting near the hearth on an evening in late autumn. Their role in the family group has changed with age. The young males now make the dangerous hunts, pursuing woolly mammoths and rhinoceroses across the tundra-like landscape, engaging in the coordinated hunting that requires speed and strength and courage. But this individual is still valuable to the group, still essential. They are a keeper of knowledge. They know where the herds migrate with the seasons. They remember from their own experience decades ago where the best stone for making tools can be found. They remember the patterns of good years and bad years, the years of plenty when the herds were abundant and the winters less severe, and the years of scarcity when survival required every ounce of ingenuity and strength. They carry in their mind the accumulated wisdom of a lifetime lived in this harsh environment. The decline is gradual, not sudden. Arthritis settles into the bones, particularly in the lower back and the large weight-bearing joints. The hands become stiffer. Walking becomes more difficult. But this individual does not cease being cared for. They remain part of the family. They remain cared for by those who love them, who remember when this elder taught them to knap stone, who remember when this elder's strength protected the family during a dangerous encounter with cave lions. This itself is evidence of something profound about their kind. These Neanderthals have a capacity for empathy, for understanding that to care for the vulnerable is to preserve something essential about what it means to be human. They do not simply abandon the old and infirm, they bring them inside the cave, they share food with them, they maintain the bonds of family and kinship even when practical survival might seem to argue for abandonment. Imagine the evening in the cave in that final season of their life. The sun is setting beyond the cave entrance, casting long shadows into the interior. The family gathers closer to the hearth. There is perhaps a meal being prepared. Meat from a successful hunt days before, now being warmed and softened by heat, making it easier for the old individual to consume, showing thought for their comfort and nutrition. The warmth of the fire pushes back the cold that seeps in through the cave entrance, the cold that intensifies each passing day as winter approaches. The smoke from the hearth drifts upward, curling toward the stone ceiling, carrying with it the warmth and the scent of cooking meat. One evening in their final season, this individual feels the weakness increasing noticeably. They notice that they tire more easily. They notice that the pain in their chest seems to intensify when they exert themselves. They know, through the wisdom of a long life, that their time is running short. They sit at the fire, watching the flames dance and flicker, watching the light play across the faces of their family members. They understand that this is likely one of their final winters. They may not see the spring. They may not see the herds return. But they do not feel fear. They have lived a long life. They have contributed to their family and their people. They will be remembered. When morning comes on that final day, the individual is gone. The family performs their rituals. They wrap the body carefully in hides, surrounding it with the materials of life. Perhaps they place stones around the burial, creating a protected space. Perhaps they scatter flowers or plants. Archaeologists have found evidence of such practices at Neanderthal burial sites like La Chapelle aux Saints and La Ferracie, pollen deposits suggesting that flowers were deliberately placed with the dead. This suggests a recognition that this death is significant, that this individual deserves reverence and ceremonial respect, that the ending of a life deserves special attention. This is culture. This is spirituality. This is evidence that Neanderthals thought about death, that they recognized its significance, that they believed something special was required by its coming. They did not simply discard their dead like discarded garbage. They treated them with care. They honored them. This behavior reveals a depth of consciousness, an understanding of mortality and meaning that transcends simple animal behavior. Over the next 40,000 years, the cave will slowly fill with sediment, clay and silt and debris washing in from outside, accumulating on the cave floor layer by layer, gradually burying the bones deeper and deeper, preserving them in a protected environment, keeping them intact through all the changes that sweep across the landscape. Glaciers advance and retreat. The climate warms and cools. Mammoths and rhinoceroses disappear. New animals arrive. Forests grow and shrink. Modern humans arrive. Civilizations rise and fall. The Roman Empire spreads across Europe. Christianity becomes the dominant religion. The medieval period emerges. The Renaissance comes and goes. The Reformation divides Christianity. The age of exploration expands the world's knowledge. The Industrial Revolution begins, the United States is founded, empires fall, new nations emerge. The world transforms beyond any recognition that the Feldhofer individual, had they lived and witnessed even a tiny fraction of these changes, could have imagined. 60,000 years pass. 40,000 years of Neanderthal extinction and human dominance. And finally, in August of 1856, men with picks and blasting powder will expose these bones to daylight once more, beginning the process by which an individual lost to time will become famous, will become significant, will change science forever. The world that once contained living Neanderthals is gone, but the bones remain, the DNA remains, the evidence remains, and through it all, across 40,000 years, a message is transmitted from the past to the present. I was here, I lived, I mattered, remember me. Johann Carl Fuhlrott, holding those bones up to the lamplight in his study in Elberfeld, became a bridge between worlds, between the ancient past and the modern scientific age, between the world of industrial capitalism and the world of Ice Age survival. Charles Darwin's Origin of Species, published in 1859, 3 years after the Feldhofer discovery, provided a framework for understanding the Neanderthals and many other fossils that were being discovered with increasing frequency in the 19th century. Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection gave meaning to the question of where the Neanderthals fit in the tree of life. Were they ancestors of modern humans? Were they a side branch that had gone extinct? Could humans and Neanderthals have a common ancestor? Yet acceptance of the Feldhofer bones as evidence of an ancient human species came slowly, hampered by Virchow's authority and by the conservative scientific establishment. Throughout the latter half of the 19th century, debate continued. As the 20th century progressed and more Neanderthal remains were discovered across Europe, in caves in Belgium, France, Italy, Spain, Croatia and beyond, a clearer picture emerged. Neanderthals were not brutish subhumans. They were intelligent beings who crafted sophisticated tools, flakes and points, and axes shaped with precision for specific purposes. They were cooperative hunters who could bring down massive Ice Age megafauna through coordinated hunting strategies. They cared for their injured and elderly, providing evidence of compassion and social bonding. They controlled fire and used it for warmth and cooking. They possibly engaged in ritual and burial practices suggesting an understanding of death, and perhaps even spiritual belief. The most influential evidence against Virchow's disease theory came with the discovery of La Chapelle-aux-Saints in France in 1908. French paleoanthropologist Marcelin Boule excavated the remains of an elderly Neanderthal male, a robust individual who had survived to old age despite a skeletal system marked by arthritis and wear, in a cave in the Dordogne region of southwestern France. The skeleton was nearly complete, one of the most intact Neanderthal specimens ever found, with cranium, vertebrae, ribs, pelvis and limb bones all preserved. Even though Boule's reconstruction was biased and flawed, he exaggerated the stooped posture and ape-like characteristics in ways we now know were incorrect, creating images of Neanderthals as hunched and brutish rather than upright. The sheer completeness and undeniability of the specimen provided evidence that Neanderthals were a distinct human species. Multiple similar skeletons could not all be pathological cases. You could argue that the Feldhofer skeleton was pathological, but when a second skeleton, from a different location, from a different time period, showed the same distinctive characteristics, the pathological explanation became harder to maintain. When subsequent discoveries provided multiple examples of the same morphological pattern, the distinctive skull shape, the robust skeleton, the powerful musculature, it became impossible to maintain that all of these individuals were deformed. The pattern was undeniable. These were members of a population, a species, a people who shared common characteristics and lived across Europe. By the early 20th century, the scientific consensus was shifting. Neanderthals were recognized as a genuine species, extinct but real, distinct from modern humans but recognizably human in their behavior and biology. It had taken 50 years. It had taken multiple discoveries. It had taken the death of Virchow, the gradual retirement of the old guard of skeptics, the rise of a new generation of scientists willing to accept the evidence. But eventually, science had won. The truth had prevailed, yet Virchow's skepticism had delayed the acceptance of this obvious truth by decades. Fuhlrott died in 1864, never living to see the final vindication of his initial insight. Schaaffhausen died in 1865. They did not see the moment when the scientific world finally accepted that they had been right. Virchow's immense prestige, his authority, his position at the pinnacle of German and European science, had been used to cast doubt on evidence that, in retrospect, was quite clear. Virchow died in 1902, long enough to see the scientific consensus shifting away from his position. But he never fully accepted the reality of Neanderthals. His stubbornness, his refusal to acknowledge that his judgment might have been wrong, stands as a remarkable example of how authority and reputation can resist evidence. How many discoveries were missed? How many insights were delayed? How much slower did science progress because one powerful skeptic chose to defend established doctrine rather than embrace revolutionary evidence? The Virchow episode stands as a cautionary tale about the dangers of authority unchecked by humility, about the risks of assuming that authority equals correctness. It is a lesson that science has had to learn repeatedly throughout its history. The greatest scientists are often not the most resistant to change. They are the ones willing to say, "I was wrong," when evidence demands it. Virchow was a great scientist, but he failed in this crucial moment. He prioritized his own authority over the evidence, and in doing so, he delayed the understanding of human origins by decades. By the time he died in 1902, the scientific consensus had moved against him. Younger scientists, unburdened by the need to defend established positions, had examined the evidence and concluded that the Neanderthals were indeed a distinct and ancient human species. The weight of evidence had finally exceeded even Virchow's immense authority. Science ultimately won, but at a cost. We lost 40 years of research that could have been conducted, 40 years of insights that could have been gained, 40 years during which Fuhlrott and Schaaffhausen might have been vindicated before their deaths. Imagine yourself now on a hunt with the Neanderthal family that once sheltered in the Feldhofer cave. It is late autumn, and the mammoths have begun their migrations across the European landscape. The sky is grey, heavy with the threat of snow. The wind carries the scent of animal musk and the cold from the distant glaciers. You're with a group of Neanderthals, perhaps 5 or 6 individuals, moving across the tundra-like landscape with purpose and intention. They are tracking a herd of woolly mammoths, a dangerous task that requires cooperation and careful planning. They speak to each other in a language you cannot understand, but their gestures are clear. They point toward tracks in the earth. They read the landscape the way a modern sailor reads the ocean. They know that mammoths are temperamental and dangerous, that a mother protecting her young can kill a hunter with a single thrust of her tusks, that a wounded mammoth can trample an entire group. But they know too that a successful hunt means meat for many days, fat for energy, hides for clothing and shelter, bones for tools and structures. They carry thrusting spears, wooden shafts with stone points lashed carefully to the tips with sinew and plant fibres. These are not the crude projectiles of popular imagination, not randomly thrown sticks or simple pointed rocks. They are carefully crafted weapons designed for a specific purpose: to penetrate the massive body of an Ice Age megafauna, to pierce through thick hide and muscle and fat to the vital organs within. The points are sharp, flaked from stone in a particular way to create an edge that can cut through hide and muscle with precision. The shafts are straight and strong, selected from appropriate wood species, birch and ash and other hardy woods, and shaped carefully over many hours of work, labour-intensive work, that serves no immediate survival purpose beyond the creation of superior weapons. This is technology. This is problem-solving. This is the application of intelligence to survival. This is evidence of planning for a future hunt, of preparation days in advance, of foresight and planning that goes beyond immediate needs. The tools are so well made, so well designed, that modern experimenters using stoneworking knowledge have struggled to replicate them. The quality speaks to a master craftsperson, to an individual with years of experience, to a tradition of tool-making refined and improved across many generations. The hunters approach the herd carefully. They have learned through generations of experience how mammoths respond to threats, how they protect their young, how they move as a family unit. The plan, coordinated silently through gestures and soft sounds, is to separate a young animal from the herd. Such an animal would be vulnerable, would be worth killing if the risk is not too high. They separate, moving into position around the herd. The tension rises. One of the hunters makes a noise, a shout that breaks the quiet of the tundra. The mammoths react, confused, uncertain where the threat originates. In that moment of confusion, a young animal is separated from the protection of its mother. The hunters move in quickly, using their spears, working together, one distracting while another attacks. The young mammoth runs, but the hunters follow, pushing it toward a prepared location where the chances of a successful kill are better. This is hunting not as individuals but as a coordinated group, requiring communication, planning, the sharing of a common goal. This is sophistication. This is evidence of abstract thought, of planning for a future outcome, of cooperation beyond simple instinct. Hours later, the successful hunters are returning to the cave with meat. Their clothes are splattered with blood. Their hands are cold from handling raw flesh in the freezing air. Their muscles are tired from the exertion of hours of hunting and butchering. But their expressions show satisfaction, pride in accomplishment. They have successfully hunted. They have killed a large animal. They have completed the dangerous task. They have provided for their family. They have ensured survival through another day, another week, perhaps through the coming winter if they can repeat this success many times more. The meat will be portioned carefully. Some will be eaten immediately, providing fresh protein and fat. Some will be dried or stored in the cool cave, food preserved for the winter months ahead when hunting is difficult and game is scarce. Nothing will be wasted. Every part of the animal will be used for something. The bones will be broken for marrow, for the rich fat inside that provides essential calories. The hides will become clothing and shelter. The sinews will become bindings and thread. The teeth might become decorations or tools or objects of symbolic significance. This is efficiency. This is sustainability. This is resource management. This is the lifeway that has supported these people for countless generations, that has allowed them to survive and flourish despite the harsh Ice Age climate. The Neanderthals have mastered their environment. They know how to live in this difficult landscape. They are as successful as any modern human population in their own time and place. They move through the landscape that a schoolteacher in Prussia would someday recognize. The same valley, the same cliffs, the same river, though everything about it is different now. The valley is emptier. The great beasts are gone. The ice has retreated. The world is warmer, but the bones of these hunters would lie in the Feldhofer cave for 40,000 years before being discovered and changing human history. The landscape will transform beyond recognition. But the bones will remain, patient witnesses to the passage of time, messengers from an ancient world, carrying stories that will eventually be told to scientists and students and people who wonder about the deep past and the peoples who came before. The breakthrough at the molecular level came in 1997, more than a century and a half after the Feldhofer discovery. Matthias Krings and colleagues at the Max Planck Institute in Munich conducted an extraordinarily delicate procedure. They carefully extracted DNA from the original Feldhofer skeleton, the very specimen that Fuhlrott had held up to the lamplight so many decades before. The specimen had been preserved in museum storage in Bonn, Germany, protected and maintained by careful curators who understood its significance. Scientists obtained permission to drill a small sample from the bones, extracting a few grains of bone powder containing the DNA accumulated over 40,000 years of burial. They extracted and sequenced the mitochondrial DNA, mtDNA, the DNA contained in the mitochondria, the cellular energy-producing structures present in every cell. This DNA is more abundant than nuclear DNA, and more likely to survive in ancient specimens, making it the ideal target for ancient DNA extraction. The mtDNA of a cell contains genes inherited purely from the mother, creating a maternal lineage that can be traced backward through evolutionary history. This was the key that would unlock Neanderthal genetics. The work required extraordinary technical skill and innovation. The DNA was fragmented, broken into tiny pieces by the passage of time and the chemical processes of decay. The bonds holding the DNA molecule together had been damaged by radiation and chemical oxidation. The Krings team had to develop techniques to recover these fragments, to amplify them using the polymerase chain reaction, a technique that can copy tiny amounts of DNA millions of times, to sequence them base pair by base pair, reading out the actual sequence of genetic information letter by letter. This work had to be conducted in sterile laboratories to prevent contamination with modern human DNA, which is ubiquitous in the environment and would destroy the integrity of the ancient DNA results. The team had to verify their results repeatedly, had to use multiple independent extractions and sequences to ensure they were reading genuine ancient DNA, and not contamination or error. This was frontier science, work at the very edge of what was possible in 1997. The results were striking and decisive. The Neanderthal mtDNA was significantly different from modern human mtDNA. The genetic distance between Neanderthal and modern human mitochondrial genomes suggested they had diverged roughly 300,000 to 400,000 years ago in evolutionary time. They were related, they shared a common ancestor, but distinct. They had followed separate evolutionary paths for an enormous period of time. This genetic evidence confirmed definitively what anatomists had long suspected. Neanderthals were indeed a distinct species, genetically separate from Homo sapiens, not merely a regional variant of modern humanity. The skeptics could no longer argue that Neanderthals were simply diseased or deformed modern humans. The DNA spoke with a clarity that bones alone could not achieve. Krings' work opened an entirely new field of scientific inquiry called paleogenomics, the study of the genetic material of extinct species. In the decades that followed, Svante Pääbo, a Swedish-Japanese geneticist at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig, Germany, pursued what many considered an impossible dream, the complete sequencing of the entire Neanderthal genome, all 3 billion base pairs of genetic information. This would require developing new techniques to extract and amplify DNA from 30,000-year-old bones, techniques that did not exist when Pääbo began his work. He and his team developed innovations in ancient DNA extraction, in DNA sequencing technology, in computational methods for assembling incomplete genetic information from broken fragments. They worked with Neanderthal specimens from across Europe, from La Chapelle-aux-Saints in France, from Vindija Cave in Croatia, from El Cidrón in Spain, from multiple sites, building a comprehensive picture of Neanderthal genetics. They faced contamination challenges from modern human DNA. Every excavation carried the risk that careless handling by modern scientists would introduce modern DNA into ancient samples. They had to develop sterile handling techniques, had to work in clean rooms, had to verify their results through multiple independent extractions and sequences. In 2010, a milestone was reached. The complete draft Neanderthal genome was published in the journal Science. The results were startling and profound. Their work showed that Neanderthals had left genetic marks on modern humans. Particularly those of European and Asian ancestry carried approximately 1 to 4% of their DNA from Neanderthal ancestors. This meant that at some point in human history, perhaps around 60,000 years ago, when Neanderthals and early modern humans overlapped in the Middle East and Europe, they had interbred. They had produced fertile offspring. Those hybrids had inherited genes from both their Neanderthal and modern human parents. Those genes had been passed down through tens of thousands of years of human history, and today they persist in the genomes of billions of modern humans. We are all, to a small but measurable degree, descended from Neanderthals. This revelation fundamentally changed our understanding of human relationships. We were not separate from Neanderthals. We had mixed with them. We had incorporated their genetic material into our own lineage. Pääbo's research also revealed other profound genetic secrets about Neanderthal capabilities. Neanderthals possessed a version of the FOXP2 gene, often called the language gene, that was similar to modern humans, suggesting they had the biological capacity for language, for complex communication, for the expression of abstract thought. This was not a gene that differed markedly between humans and other primates. This was a gene shared between Neanderthals and modern humans. They had large brains, large enough for abstract thinking, for symbolic thought, for the kind of mental complexity that characterizes modern human consciousness. They were thinking, feeling, speaking beings. They were not primitive brutes. They were human, genuinely, undeniably human, whatever the previous century of misrepresentation had suggested. The genetic evidence confirmed what careful anthropologists had already deduced from behavior and tool-making and burial practices. Neanderthals were intelligent, sophisticated human beings. The genetic evidence has revealed more than just relatedness between Neanderthals and modern humans. It has revealed something profound and deeply moving, that modern humans and Neanderthals overlap in time for several thousand years. We coexisted. We shared landscapes. We hunted the same game. We competed for the same caves and shelter. We encountered each other. We knew each other. We looked at each other across that ancient landscape and recognized something of ourselves. Neanderthals had been in Europe for roughly 200,000 years when modern humans first arrived from Africa around 45,000 years ago. For perhaps 10,000 to 15,000 years, our two species lived on the same continent in the same regions, sometimes even in the same sites, though perhaps not always at exactly the same times. Skeletal evidence from places like the Mount Carmel caves shows early modern humans and Neanderthals living in the same area, using the same caves in different layers, suggesting temporal overlap and contact. The contact was inevitable. When populations of different species occupy the same geographic space, they will eventually encounter each other. And from that contact, we know that something remarkable happened. Some interbreeding occurred between the two species. The genetic evidence is unequivocal, definitive, undeniable. Roughly 1 to 4% of the genome of non-African modern humans comes from Neanderthals. Non-Africans carry on average 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA. Africans carry none or very little because Africans diverged from other modern humans early and went back to Africa without mixing with Neanderthals, who were restricted to Europe and Western Asia. We absorbed Neanderthal genetic material. Their genes survive in us. We carry forward their legacy in our own bodies and genomes. Their intelligence, their strength, their adaptation to cold climates, aspects of their genetic heritage, persist in modern human populations today. Some genes we inherited from Neanderthals provide resistance to viruses and pathogens we encountered in Europe and Asia. Some genes affect our immune systems and our ability to fight infection. Some affect our metabolism and how we process food and energy. Some affect our physiology in subtle ways we're only beginning to understand. Neanderthal genes are woven into the fabric of non-African humanity. We are not purely modern human. We are hybrid beings, descendants of two species. We are partly them, and they are partly us. What happened to the Neanderthals themselves? Why did they go extinct while we survived? The answers are complex and still debated among scientists. Climate change played a role. The period from 40,000 to 30,000 years ago saw significant climate fluctuations, with cold periods alternating with warmer ones, making survival challenging. But modern humans survived these fluctuations. Perhaps we were more flexible in our adaptation, more capable of adjusting our behavior and culture to new circumstances. Perhaps our toolkits were more sophisticated, offering more solutions to problems of survival. Perhaps our social structures were more complex and effective, allowing for larger groups and more complex cooperation. Perhaps we possessed language that was more sophisticated, allowing for more detailed communication and more abstract thinking. Perhaps we were simply better at competition, better at competing for resources with Neanderthals and with other species. Perhaps disease played a role. We may have brought pathogens that devastated Neanderthal populations. Perhaps it was a combination of all these factors, a perfect storm of circumstance that favoured modern humans and disadvantaged Neanderthals. We do not know with certainty. We only know that Neanderthals are gone. The last Neanderthals disappeared around 30,000 to 40,000 years ago, depending on which specimens are dated and which dating methods are trusted. They vanished. Their species went extinct. But not completely. Their genetic legacy lives on in all non-African humans today. Some of their genes continue to be expressed. Some of their genetic variants persist in human populations. Some of their adaptations to European and Asian climates persist in modern humans living in those regions. In a sense, Neanderthals did not completely disappear. They were absorbed. They were incorporated. They became part of us. In 2022, Svante Pääbo received the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for his pioneering work in paleogenomics and his groundbreaking studies of human evolution. Nearly 166 years had passed since those workers in the Feldhofer quarry had nearly thrown away those bones into the rubble of their excavation. The arc of history had bent toward vindication. It was a vindication of Fuhlroth's original insight, of Schaaffhausen's careful anatomical analysis, of Charles Lyell and Thomas Huxley's reasoned skepticism of Virchow's disease theory, of William King's 1864 declaration that a new human species had once existed on Earth. The Nobel Prize is the highest scientific honour, awarded only for discoveries of extraordinary significance. That Pääbo received it for his work on Neanderthal showed the world how important this research had become, how much it had illuminated about human origins and human nature and consciousness. Pääbo's acceptance speech focused not just on the scientific achievement, but on what it meant philosophically. that we share kinship with Neanderthals, that we carry their genetic legacy, that extinction is both real and ultimately not absolute when genetic material is incorporated into descendant populations. The Nobel Prize marked a triumph not just for Pääbo, but for Fuhlrott, for Schaaffhausen, for all the scientists over 166 years who had pursued the truth about Neanderthals despite resistance and skepticism from the scientific establishment. The implications of these discoveries, from Fuhlrott's initial recognition through Pääbo's genetic work, have been profound and far-reaching, reshaping how we understand ourselves, our place in nature, and the meaning of being human. The Neanderthals were not our ancestors, but they were our relatives. We shared a common ancestor with them. Perhaps around 400,000 years ago, a human being whose descendants branched into two lineages. We diverged into separate species. They specialized for cold climates and became increasingly adapted to the Ice Age conditions of Europe. We developed differently, becoming more flexible in our adaptation, better able to survive in varied climates, more mobile, more capable of adjusting to new environments. But 60,000 years ago, when we first encountered them in the Middle East and later in Europe, when our expanding populations overlapped with their established territories, we interbred. We produced hybrid offspring, beings that were partly Neanderthal and partly modern human, belonging fully to neither species and yet to both. We, modern humans, carried forward the genetic legacy of those hybrids. We are not purely modern human, we are partially Neanderthal. Every human of European or Asian ancestry carries this genetic debt to our ancient cousins. This knowledge should humble us. This knowledge should make us wonder about what we have lost with the extinction of Neanderthals. What diversity of thought and culture and way of being disappeared when they vanished? What uniquely Neanderthal art or music or literature or philosophy was never recorded, never passed down, was lost when the last Neanderthal died? What insights did they have that died with them? What solutions to problems did they develop that we had to rediscover or imagine anew? We do not know why they went extinct. Multiple factors probably contributed. Climate change played a role. The period from 40,000 to 30,000 years ago saw significant environmental fluctuations. Competition with modern humans certainly played a role. We were more numerous, perhaps more adaptable, perhaps displaced them from hunting grounds and shelter. Disease may have played a role. Pathogens we brought from Africa might have devastated populations not exposed to them. Or perhaps it was simply that evolution is random, and the dice of chance rolled in our favour and not theirs. But they left their mark on us, in our DNA, in our genetic inheritance, in the very code that makes us human. We are forever linked to them through biology and history. The mystery of the Neanderthals remains unsolved even now. We know more than Fuhlrott and Schaaffhausen ever imagined. But the deepest questions remain. What did they think about? What was their inner emotional life like? Did they dream? Did they mourn their dead? Did they love? Did they fear? Did they wonder about the stars and the meaning of the night sky? Did they create music? Did they tell stories? Did they have religion or spirituality? Did they create art in ways we have not yet recognized? Did they have poetry? Did they have philosophy? These are questions science might never answer with certainty. And that uncertainty is precious. It leaves room for imagination, for empathy, for the kind of wondering that allows us to bridge 40,000 years and feel kinship with those ancient people. Every bone found, every DNA sequence read, brings us closer to understanding our place in the natural world. The Neanderthals were not our ancestors, but they were our relatives. They shared this planet. They felt pain and cold and hunger and fear and the comfort of family. They cared for their young. They made tools. They hunted. They created shelters. They had meaning and purpose. They were human. They were truly human. And if we carry their genetic material in our own bodies, if their DNA flows through our veins, then in a very real sense they were ancestors. We are not purely modern human. We are partly Neanderthal. We are hybrid beings, descendants of both species, carrying forward the genetic legacy of people who lived and died 40,000 years before anything resembling modern civilization existed. What do the Feldhofer bones tell us if we examine them carefully, if we hold them and measure them and analyze them with all the tools of modern science? They tell us a story of a being who lived a hard life. The bones show evidence of muscular strength far exceeding modern human norms. The limb bones are thick and robust. The muscle attachment points are pronounced, suggesting powerful muscles throughout the body. This was a being built for strength and power, specialized for a world where survival required physical capability beyond what modern humans typically possess. The bone density is high, suggesting a metabolism adapted to cold climates. The blood vessels in the bones are larger than in modern humans, suggesting greater blood flow, suggesting adaptation to extreme cold requiring intense thermoregulation. The Feldhofer individual was built for the Ice Age, designed by evolution for survival in extreme conditions. The teeth show heavy wear, suggesting they were used for tearing meat, for processing food with the teeth rather than solely with hands and tools. The jaw is powerful, the bite force was tremendous. This was a creature that ate meat, that relied heavily on animal protein for survival. That was an apex predator in the food chain. The bones also tell us about illness and injury, about a life that was hard and full of physical challenges. The pelvis shows evidence of healed injuries, breaks that had mended imperfectly but had mended. The spine shows arthritis, bone-on-bone grinding that would have caused chronic pain in life, pain that would have been unrelenting, that would have made movement difficult and uncomfortable. The arms show evidence of old breaks, fractures that had healed, suggesting survived injuries that would have been life-threatening without family support and care. Modern medicine might have helped recover from such injuries, might have offered pain relief. But in the Ice Age there was no medicine. There was no pain relief. There was only endurance. There was only the care of family members. The fact that this individual recovered from these injuries, that the bones healed, means that family members kept the individual alive. They shared food, they protected the injured person, they maintained the group bonds despite the added burden. The individual had lived long despite suffering, despite pain, despite injury, surviving perhaps 50 or 60 harsh winters, an extraordinary achievement in an environment where many did not survive to 30. This speaks to remarkable resilience. This speaks to the care of family members who maintained the injured individual despite the challenges of Ice Age survival. This speaks to social bonds stronger than simple survival instinct, stronger than genetic relatedness alone, suggesting compassion and understanding and values that transcend pure evolutionary advantage. We can read in these bones the story of a life lived, a life that mattered to others, a life that was valued even when the individual could no longer fully participate in hunting and the primary food acquisition for the group. The care of this elderly individual was a choice, not an accident of survival. It speaks to their humanity in the deepest sense. The Neanderthals, who vanished from the Earth 40,000 years ago, have become part of the very latest and most advanced science. Their bones, fragile things made of calcium and phosphate, organic materials that decay and deteriorate and should have been destroyed by the natural processes of time and geological activity, have survived to teach us what we need to know about our past. Their DNA, tiny molecules containing information passed down through generations, has survived in fragments despite being damaged by radiation and chemical degradation over the millennia, and has been recovered and read by scientists using instruments and techniques that would have seemed like magic to any scientist of the 19th century. The polymerase chain reaction that allows amplification of tiny DNA fragments, the DNA sequencers that can read millions of base pairs, the computers that can assemble this data into comprehensible genomes, the mathematical models that can interpret the evolutionary distances, all would seem miraculous to Fuhlrott or Schaaffhausen, or even to Virchow. They used oil lamps and magnifying glasses. Modern scientists use lasers and electron microscopes and supercomputers. The tools have changed beyond recognition. But the human drive to understand remains the same. The curiosity that motivated Fuhlrott to preserve those bones continues to motivate scientists today. Their discovery set in motion a century and a half of investigation that continues because each answer brings new questions. The more we learn about Neanderthals, the more complex and fascinating they become. They were not simple. They were not primitive in the sense of being unsophisticated or lacking intelligence. They were sophisticated beings with sophisticated capabilities. They made complex tools. They hunted dangerous megafauna. They cared for their injured and elderly. They engaged in burial practices suggesting spiritual belief. They possibly created art. They had large brains capable of abstract thought. And yet the mystery of who they were and what they thought and how they felt remains partly unsolved. Partly unsolvable, but infinitely worth contemplating. The future of Neanderthal research will almost certainly bring new discoveries and new understanding. Scientists continue to find new Neanderthal fossils. New techniques for analysing ancient DNA will likely reveal aspects of Neanderthal genetics and health and adaptation that we cannot yet imagine. Perhaps we will extract ancient proteins and learn more about Neanderthal development and aging. Perhaps we will recover ancient RNA and learn about gene expression. Perhaps new fossils will reveal more about Neanderthal behaviour and culture. Perhaps comparative studies with other ancient human species, Denisovans, early modern humans, Homo erectus, will illuminate the story of human evolution. The story of human origins is not complete. It is still being written. Every new discovery adds a line, a paragraph, a chapter to our understanding. The Feldhofer skeleton, 166 years after its discovery, continues to teach us. Imagine what we will learn in the next 166 years, with technologies we cannot yet foresee, with questions we have not yet learned to ask. The future of Neanderthal science is as vast and mysterious as the Neanderthals themselves. And now, as this story nears its close and the hour grows late, let me take you on one final journey through time. Imagine yourself standing today in the Neander Valley. It is 2026, and the valley is not as it was in 1856. The quarry has long since closed, its industrial purpose exhausted, its profits extracted, its stone taken away to build the cities of the Rhineland. The Feldhofer cave no longer exists. It was destroyed by the industrial operations that initially revealed the skeleton. The cave was carved out by water over millions of years. It was inhabited by Neanderthals for potentially thousands of years, and then it was destroyed in a matter of decades by men with picks and blasting powder, men who did not know what they were destroying, men who only saw stone and profit. The limestone has been extracted and turned into buildings and roads and cement, into the infrastructure of human civilization. But there is a small museum now, a quiet place dedicated to the memory of the discovery and the site. It is called the Neanderthal Museum. Standing in the valley, you feel the same cool wind off the Düsseldorf River that has flowed here for millions of years, that flowed here 40,000 years ago when the Feldhofer individual lived and died. The same geological layers that entombed the Neanderthal individual are still visible in the remaining cliffs. The same landscape, though transformed by human activity, still shows the bones of its ancient structure. The valley remembers, the stones remember, the flowing water remembers, and in this museum, in this small building in this transformed valley, the story is told and retold. The discovery is commemorated, the Neanderthals are honoured. The connection across 40,000 years is acknowledged, and if you could hold those fragile bones in your own hands, the Feldhofer skeleton preserved in museum archives, the very bones that Fuhlrott examined by lamplight in his study in Elberfeld, that Schaaffhausen studied carefully with his anatomist's eye at the University of Bonn, that Virchow insisted were diseased and pathological, that William King named scientifically, that scientists in 1997 and 2010 have sequenced genetically, that Pääbo examined as the first complete ancient human genome, what would you feel? The weight of them, the solidity, the reality of them, not an abstraction, not a footnote in a history book, but actual bone, actual material that once held living flesh, that once moved through the world, that once felt pain and warmth and hunger and the comfort of family. 40,000 years collapsed into the span of your hand, a human being who walked and talked and loved and feared, who made tools and hunted game and sat around fires with family, who grew old and was cared for by their relatives, who eventually died and was buried with care and ceremony, reduced now to pale bone and precious DNA sequences, and yet the bones speak. They cry out across the millennia. They say, I was here, I lived, I mattered, my species shaped this planet, we survived ice ages, we created tools and art and ritual. We cared for each other. We were thinking, feeling beings. We were human. Do not forget us. Remember that we too were human. Remember that we lived and died and mattered. Remember that science can reach backward across vast time and find us and know us. Remember that connection is possible across 40,000 years. Imagine yourself now in Johann Carl Fuhlroth's study in Elberfeld, in that moment when he first held the Feldhofer bones by lamplight and realised what they were. Feel the emotion of that moment, the sudden understanding that everything accepted about human history was wrong, the knowledge that he alone was witnessing something that would change science forever, the uncertainty about whether anyone would believe him, the weight of holding knowledge that others would dispute and debate and deny, and yet persisting in the truth of what he had seen despite the skepticism and the authority arrayed against him. Fuhlrott did not live to see the vindication. He died in 1864, just 7 years after the discovery, never knowing that he was right, that history would eventually prove him correct. But his persistence, his careful observations, his willingness to challenge authority and seek expert validation, these things mattered. Without Fuhlrott, those bones would have been lost, they would have been discarded, they would have been forgotten. The Neanderthals would have remained forever unknown. Future discoveries might eventually have revealed their existence, but perhaps not. Perhaps those bones were unique in surviving and in being recognized. Perhaps we owe our entire modern understanding of human origins to Fuhlrott's curiosity and care and intellectual courage. The course of paleoanthropology would have been entirely different without him. Science would have been delayed by decades, perhaps by generations. We might not yet understand our kinship with Neanderthals. We might still believe we were created separately, distinct from all other life. Fuhlrott changed that. His careful attention to those bones opened a door that has never closed. Imagine yourself in Matthias Krings' laboratory in Munich in 1997, watching as he carefully extracted the first mitochondrial DNA from the original Feldhofer specimen. The technology available to Krings did not exist in Fuhlrott's time. The knowledge did not exist, but the bone was waiting. It had waited for 141 years for the science to catch up to the evidence. And when the mtDNA sequence was finally read, it said clearly, these are not diseased moderns. These are not Cossacks with rickets. These are a distinct species. These are Neanderthals. Virchow's authority, so powerful a century earlier, suddenly seemed quaint and misguided. DNA was the final referee, the ultimate arbiter, the voice that could not be disputed. The timeline of this discovery is itself remarkable. 1829, Engis II discovered in Belgium, overlooked. 1848, Gibraltar I discovered, ignored. 1856, Feldhofer skeleton discovered in Germany, nearly discarded. 1857, Fuhlrott and Schaaffhausen present findings, met with skepticism. 1863, Virchow dismisses the bones as pathological. His authority carries the day. 1863, Charles Lyell examines the quarry and bones, supports their antiquity. 1864, William King names the species Homo neanderthalensis. 1886, Spy Cave discovery in Belgium provides definitive corroboration. 1908, La Chapelle-aux-Saints skeleton discovered in France, further evidence. 1911, Marcelin Boule's flawed reconstruction cemented the brutish caveman image for decades. 1997, Matthias Krings extracts mtDNA, providing genetic proof of distinctness. 2010, complete Neanderthal genome sequenced by Pääbo team. 2022, Svante Pääbo awarded Nobel Prize. Each discovery built upon previous ones. Each scientist contributed to a slowly accumulating understanding. The story of Neanderthals is not the story of a single discovery, but of a slowly growing recognition, a gradually strengthening conviction that these ancient people had existed and mattered. And now imagine yourself in 2026, living in a world where we know more about Neanderthals than we know about most modern human ethnic groups. We have their full genome, 3 billion base pairs of information read and analysed. We know they were intelligent, possessed large brains, created sophisticated tools, hunted cooperatively, cared for their injured and elderly, engaged in burial rituals, and possibly created art. We know they interbred with our ancestors when the two species overlapped in time, around 60,000 years ago, in the regions where our species first arrived from Africa. We carry their genes. We are part Neanderthal. Approximately 1 to 4% of our genetic code comes directly from them, inherited through countless generations, persisting in our genomes today. We are part them, and they are part us, and time has collapsed the distinction into something more interesting and more profound than either group alone could be. This is what that discovery in a German quarry in 1856 meant. This is what those bones, nearly thrown away by workers who saw them as obstacles, have become. From objects of dismissal to objects of fascination, from footnotes in history to central figures in the story of human origins, from vanished peoples whose very existence was questioned to recognized members of our own genus, our own extended family, our own story. The journey from 1856 to 2026 has been a journey of discovery, of scientific progress, of changing understanding. And the journey is not over. The mystery endures. The Neanderthals continue to teach us, continue to reveal new information with each new discovery and each new technology. The story does not end with the 2022 Nobel Prize. Science continues. New questions arise. As we learn more about Neanderthals, the nature of our questions changes. We now know they were intelligent. We now know they interbred with us. We now know their genes survive in us. We now know they cared for their elderly and infirm. We now know they created tools of sophisticated design. We now know they controlled fire and used it for warmth and cooking. We now know they hunted in cooperative groups, but we still don't know the deepest truths about them. Did they have language as complex as modern human language? Evidence suggests they had the genes for language, the brain capacity for language, the neurological structures for language, but we cannot know if they actually spoke or sang or created poetry. The actual sounds of Neanderthal voices are lost to us forever. We will never hear them speak. We will never know the cadence of their language, the way they pronounced words, the music of their speech. Did they have art? Evidence is controversial. Marks on stone and bone appear intentional, possibly artistic, but interpretation remains uncertain. Some argue that hand stencils found in caves are evidence of Neanderthal art and self-awareness. Others argue they are merely pragmatic marks. The debate continues. Did they have religion? Burial practices suggest spiritual belief, suggest an understanding of death and an investment in ritual around death. But we cannot know the content of their beliefs, cannot know what they thought about the afterlife or the divine. Did they have music? We can speculate based on bone flutes found in other ancient sites, but we do not know if Neanderthals used music for spiritual purposes or purely for entertainment. Did they love? Did they grieve? Did they experience joy and sorrow as we do? Did they tell stories around fires? Did they have humour? Did they laugh? These are questions we may never be able to answer with certainty. Science has limits. DNA can tell us about genetics. Bones can tell us about anatomy and the stresses of life. Tools can tell us about behaviour and intelligence. Burial sites can tell us about spirituality and social values, but consciousness remains mysterious. The inner life of an ancient human being, even one whose DNA we have read completely, may remain forever beyond our reach. And perhaps that is appropriate. Perhaps we should not expect to completely understand being separated from us by 40,000 years. Perhaps the mystery should remain. Perhaps it leaves room for imagination, for empathy, for the kind of contemplation that science alone cannot provide. Perhaps the mystery is valuable. Perhaps it teaches us that not everything can be quantified or measured or reduced to data. Perhaps it reminds us to respect the unknowable and to hold space for wonder in our scientific worldview. And now, as this story nears its close and the hour grows late, imagine yourself drifting, sinking slowly into sleep, allowing your mind to move backward in time. Feel yourself descending through the layers of history. The 2020s fade away like morning mist. The 1900s pass like a dream. The medieval period retreats. The Roman Empire rises and falls in a thought. The pyramids of Egypt rise and fall. The rise of agriculture and cities retreats into the distance. You are moving backward through time. The climate is shifting. The ice is returning. The great beasts reappear in your imagination, the mammoths and the cave lions and the woolly rhinoceroses. The valleys are wilder, the nights darker, the world vaster. You're descending toward that distant shore, that cold valley, that small cave lit by firelight. Imagine yourself sitting at that ancient hearth. Feel the warmth of the fire on your face, the radiant heat pushing back the cold. Feel the weight of the animal hide wrapping your shoulders, heavy and protective. Feel the leggings protecting your legs from the chill. Feel the furs warm against your skin, the accumulated skins of many animals, prepared and sewn together by your family across many seasons. Feel the ground beneath you, stone and earth and ash from countless fires before this one. Hear the sound of the Düsseldorf River flowing below, a sound that has not changed in 40,000 years. The same sound that will echo in this valley for thousands of years to come, long after your people are gone, long after modern humans will dominate this landscape, long after civilization emerges and falls and transforms. Hear the soft sounds of your family breathing, of children sleeping, of someone turning in sleep nearby. Feel the pulse of life around you, the beating hearts of the people you love, the slow breathing of rest, the peace of safety and belonging. Know that you are safe. Know that you are home. Know that this moment, this feeling, will be remembered not by your family, for they will all pass into time and be forgotten, but by people 40,000 years in the future who will hold your bones in their hands and try to imagine what your life was like, what you felt, how you experienced the world. Your bones will become famous, your death will matter, your life will teach lessons. This moment, this feeling, is part of the great heritage of being human, a heritage so ancient that it stretches back beyond history, beyond civilization, beyond language itself, and it will extend forward into a future you cannot imagine, into worlds you would not recognize, into times when your species will be gone, but your genetic legacy will persist, woven into the fabric of modern humanity. Feel yourself sinking deeper into this ancient time. The fire before you is warm, the smoke curls upward through the darkness. The family members around you are sleeping. The rock walls of the cave seem to pulse with warmth and life. The small sounds of the cave, dripping water in the darkness, the faint rustle of someone shifting position, the breathing of family members, the occasional crack and pop of the fire as wood burns and settles. These are the sounds of home. This is safety. This is belonging. This is what it means to be part of a family, a community, a people. The rhythm of life in the Ice Age is different from modern life. It is slower in some ways, more immediate in others. No electricity, no telephones, no written words, no distant communication with people you have never met, but also no office jobs, no rush hour traffic, no constant stimulation from screens, no anxiety about events happening on the other side of the world. Life is lived in the present moment. Life is lived in connection with the people around you and the landscape that sustains you. Life is lived in the rhythm of seasons, the migration of animals, the cycles of the natural world. This is not deprivation. This is not primitive. This is a complete human experience, rich in meaning and connection, rich in relationships, rich in the bonds of family and community. The Neanderthals understood this. They lived this way for 200,000 years. They developed culture and tradition and meaning within this way of life. They were not waiting for modern technology to make them happy. They were complete humans living complete lives. And from this moment, 400 centuries in the past, a message reaches forward through time, a message encoded in bones and DNA and archaeological evidence. Remember us. We lived. We suffered. We loved. We created meaning. We were human. We were intelligent and feeling and capable of abstract thought. We were not primitive. We were not brutish. We were people. And you, descendants of the people who replaced us, you carry forward a piece of us in your very DNA. We are not gone. We are part of you. We are part of your story. We mixed with your ancestors. We created hybrid children. We passed on our genes. In every non-African human alive today, a tiny fraction of Neanderthal DNA persists. We live on in you. We survived. We are part of the future even though we vanished from the present. Our species may have gone extinct, but our genetic legacy persists. Our species may have been replaced, but we are not forgotten. Because in the future, in a time we cannot imagine, in a world we could not recognize, humans like you will find our bones and study them and think about us and remember us. That future time is beginning now. That moment has come. You are the ones we reach across 40,000 years to touch. You are the ones remembering us. You are the ones keeping us alive in human consciousness. Remember us well. The fire is fading now. The images are becoming dreamlike and soft. The mystery of those ancient people remains unresolved, will perhaps always remain unresolved. We can know their DNA. We can measure their bones. We can analyze their tools. We can reconstruct their behavior from archaeological evidence. We can understand the broad outlines of their lives. But the deepest mystery, what it felt like to be them, to think with their minds, to feel with their hearts, to experience consciousness as they experienced it, that mystery will still be there in the morning. It will remain as a reminder that despite all our science, all our technology, all our knowledge, there are some things we can only approach with wonder, with imagination, with reverent uncertainty. Some mysteries should remain mysterious. Some things should remain beyond our complete understanding. The ancient Neanderthals, in their silence across 40,000 years, teach us this profound lesson: that connection is possible across vast time, that empathy can bridge the gap between worlds, that remembering the dead is one of the noblest things we can do. The story of the Feldhofer discovery reminds us of something essential about science itself. It is not a static body of knowledge. It is a process, a continuous conversation between the present and the past, between theory and evidence, between imagination and observation. Fuhlrott made a discovery. Schaaffhausen validated it. Virchow challenged it. Lyell and Huxley examined it carefully. King named it scientifically. The scientific community debated it for decades. New discoveries accumulated. New specimens were found. The debate shifted and evolved. Finally, in the 20th century, consensus emerged. But the story did not end. New techniques were developed. New evidence emerged. Genetics revolutionized our understanding. DNA sequencing revealed truths that bones alone could not convey. And the conversation continues today, with scientists still learning new things about Neanderthals, still asking new questions, still refining our understanding. This is how science works at its best. Not as a collection of fixed facts handed down by authorities, not as dogma that cannot be questioned, but as a living process of discovery and understanding, where evidence is carefully examined, where authority is respected but not unchallenged, where new discoveries can overturn previous understanding. The Feldhofer skeleton is a perfect example of this process. Those bones, nearly thrown away in 1856, have become one of the most studied human fossils in existence. They have taught us more and more with each passing decade, with each new technology, with each new perspective, and they will likely continue to teach us. Future technologies may reveal things about Neanderthals that we cannot yet imagine. Future discoveries may shed light on questions we cannot yet formulate. The study of Neanderthals teaches us something profound about what it means to be human. We often think of being human as involving specific traits: language, tool-making, art, abstract thought, spiritual belief, consciousness. But as we learn more about Neanderthals, we see that all of these traits, or something very close to them, existed in that ancient species. If Neanderthals had language and tools and possibly art and certainly spiritual practice, then being human is not limited to modern humans. Being human is something broader, something that can exist in different forms, something that can be shared across species and across time. Perhaps being human is not about specific traits but about consciousness, the awareness of one's own existence, the understanding of time and change, the recognition that one will die, the capacity to create meaning in a meaningless universe, the ability to care for others beyond simple reproductive advantage, the drive to understand the world, to ask questions about existence, to contemplate the mysteries of existence. All of these capacities appear to exist in Neanderthals, preserved in their bones and tools and burial practices, evident in the care they showed for their injured and elderly, visible in any reasonable interpretation of their behaviour and artefacts. The Neanderthals teach us that consciousness can take many forms. Different brains can house different kinds of minds. Different body builds can support different ways of being human. Our lineage did not invent consciousness. We inherited it from our ancestors. We developed it further, perhaps. We expressed it differently, but we did not invent it. And that knowledge should change how we think about ourselves, about our uniqueness, about what makes us special. We are not the only consciousness that has ever emerged on this planet. We are not the only beings that have pondered their existence. We are not alone, have never been alone, have always been part of a living world full of other beings thinking their own thoughts, feeling their own feelings, creating their own meanings. The Neanderthals remind us that we humans are part of nature, connected through biology and history to all other living things. We are part of a vast tree of life, related to animals in ways we're only beginning to understand fully. We are products of evolution shaped by millions of years of natural processes. We are not separate from nature. We are part of it. We are animals, yes, but animals with extraordinary consciousness, with the capacity for abstract thought, with the ability to contemplate our own nature and our place in the world. The Neanderthals had these capacities too, though expressed differently than in modern humans. The recognition of this kinship is humbling. It reminds us that all humans, whether ancient or modern, whether descended from Neanderthals genetically or not, share a common humanity. We share consciousness. We share the capacity for love and grief and wonder. We share the existential knowledge that we will die, that time passes, that nothing lasts forever. The story of the Feldhofer skeleton reminds us of something else, the importance of conservation and careful study of our cultural and scientific heritage. Those bones nearly were lost. A few years earlier, before Fuhlrott's attention and careful interest, they would have been destroyed or scattered. The cave they came from was destroyed by industrial activity. How many other important fossils have been lost to development, to quarrying, to mining, to human activity? How many discoveries go unrecognized? How many ancient sites are damaged before their significance is understood? The Feldhofer cave is gone. But its bones survived. They were brought into scientific study. They were preserved and protected. Future generations will be able to study them with even more advanced technologies that we cannot yet imagine. This underscores the importance of protection of paleontological sites, careful excavation and study of ancient remains, and preservation of fossils and artifacts for future study. Science progresses, technology advances, methods improve. What cannot be answered now may become answerable in the future. We must preserve the evidence so that future scientists, with their advanced knowledge and tools, can continue to learn. The story also reminds us of the importance of intellectual curiosity, of personal initiative, of the willingness to pursue knowledge despite obstacles and skepticism. Fuhlrott was not a famous scientist. He was a provincial schoolteacher. But he possessed curiosity. He built a knowledge base through personal effort and study. He recognized the significance of evidence when he encountered it. He persisted in pursuing his convictions despite the skepticism he faced. He consulted with experts. He built a case carefully. He contributed to science in a meaningful way despite his modest position. This is inspiring. It reminds us that science is not limited to the famous and the well-positioned. It can be done by anyone with curiosity, care, and persistence. Anyone can contribute to human knowledge. Anyone can make a discovery. Anyone can change the course of science. The Feldhofer discovery teaches a final lesson before we drift towards sleep. It teaches that knowledge is not static. Truth is not permanent. Understanding evolves and changes with new evidence and new technology. What was believed with certainty 100 years ago, that Neanderthals were brutish subhumans or diseased modern humans unsuited for true humanity, is now known to be false. Future science will likely overturn some of our current understanding. Perhaps in 100 years scientists will laugh at our naivete in certain areas. Perhaps they will have discovered things about Neanderthals that will surprise and delight us. Perhaps they will have recovered proteins or RNA or other biomolecules that will tell us things we cannot yet imagine. Perhaps they will have developed understandings of consciousness and intelligence and humanity that will reframe the questions we are asking today. Perhaps they will have discovered evidence of Neanderthal music or art or literature in forms we have not yet recognized. If this story helped you relax tonight, consider subscribing so you always have a new story ready for those nights when sleep doesn't come easily. It takes just a moment, and it means the world to this channel, and that is beautiful. That is the nature of science. It is humble. It is willing to be wrong. It is willing to change. It is willing to let evidence overturn authority and tradition and previous understanding. This is what makes science powerful and worth pursuing. This is what makes the study of the past infinitely valuable. The mystery endures. The questions remain open. The discovery continues. Rest now. Let sleep come gently. The Neanderthals rest in time. The mystery rests, patient and eternal. The story will be there when you wake. But for now, let it fade. Let the valley fade. Let the fire fade. Let the mystery fade into the gentle darkness of sleep, where all mysteries seem small, and all time collapses into the eternal present of the dreaming mind. The Neanderthals are at peace, their story preserved in bone and DNA, and in the scientific understanding we have built over generations of careful study and investigation. Their lives continue in the genetic legacy they left behind, in the genes that persist in modern humans, in the billions of people alive today who carry Neanderthal DNA and live lives of meaning and connection and consciousness, and soon so will you be. Sleep now. Sleep peacefully. The mystery will still be there in the morning. It will wait patiently for you to wake and wonder again about those ancient people, those distant cousins, those fascinating ancestors. The mystery will endure, and so will you. The story continues forward into the future, into the unknown. The past echoes in the present. And the mystery, as always, remains patient and eternal, waiting patiently to teach us new lessons and new insights when we return to contemplate it with fresh eyes and renewed wonder and deepened understanding of what it means to be human.